What is happening is a progressive erosion of freedom that is happening very quietly, very much in the background, without anyone particularly thinking about it. And it is being driven, it's the technological equivalent of the medium is the message. And the medium in this case is large-scale, big data companies that have network effects, right? And then secondarily in some countries, governments. And I'd like to illustrate this with a trivial example. And an example that I don't think I've heard anyone other than me ever use, so that you don't get into very high-minded topics. It's a very trivial example. I used to live in New York, and New York has yellow cabs, and you hail them off the street. And you hail them off the street, and the yellow taxi stops, and you jump in, and they take you wherever they're taking you, give them $20, and you get out, right? And the only way someone can stop you from doing that is by arresting you, right? Like, you can be prevented. There's no particular way that any actor, including the state, can say, hey, Ryan, you're not allowed to use a taxi anymore, right? That's just not a thing, right? They'd have to come, you'd have to be deprived of your freedom of motion, and to be deprived of that, you have to be, because we have strong constitutional protections, you have to be charged with a specific crime, and there's going to be probable cause, and you get a lawyer and a jury of your peers, and all of these things, right? Now, I think the market share now of Uber and Lyft in New York, and now that the taxi cabs have their own app, I think it's like 50%, and it's growing. And someday it's going to be all of them, right? Like someday everything is going to be app intermediated. Now, what is needed for Uber to say, I don't want Ryan using my service anymore? Well, absolutely nothing. It's a private service. You have zero rights whatsoever to be on Uber's servers, to hail taxis using Uber's system. I mean, arguably correctly, right? That's private property. It's their property. It's not your property. And so if you violate their terms of service, but honestly, if the CEO of Uber wakes up and says, I don't like the look of that guy's face, you're off the platform. No due process, no what have you, because something that was decentralized in the physical world, hailing a taxi in the physical world is a decentralized exercise. There's taxis walking around and people walking around and cash, right? That's how New York worked in all periods until maybe, 5, 8 years ago, right? It's fully decentralized. It is now becoming centralized with a centralized choke point, okay? And you might be blocked for purely private reasons, or, as we have seen with Twitter, which is not the least surprising thing I have heard, the government might lean on private choke points, right? And maybe within their constitutional parameters, but lean on them. Oh, I don't know. We have some interesting information about Ryan. Maybe we don't let him get into all these taxis, right, into these Ubers.
He does work at Bankless after all. Kind of sketchy.
That's right. He works at Bankless after all, right? It's sketchy. And what's happening is that is happening everywhere. Google has centralized media, right? Facebook has centralized interpersonal communication. Twitter has centralized another version of that. eBay has centralized, the yard sale plus. YouTube is a huge percentage now of video communication. And so you take all these things that were decentralized and they become centralized. That's one bucket. The second bucket that has gone along with this, and it's one of these things that there's nothing wrong with it per se, it's just when you put it all together, you end up with a weird outcome, is post 9/11, the US has put an incredible amount of effort into AML and KYC. And this is one of those things that I am actually not like some weird anarchist. I do not believe that AML and KYC in principle is inappropriate, right? But we have over a 20-year period, and it's very visible to me, because I take interest in the inners of the financial systems. We have gone from a point where cash was viewed neutrally to cash is now viewed with suspicion. There is no chance cash could have gotten launched today if it didn't already exist, right? Let's say cash did not exist. And then someone said, yeah, federal government's going to come up with this really cool thing. It's a piece of paper. There's no KYC. There's no AML. You can take it with you. There's no record of what you're doing. You don't have to KYC your counterparty. You don't have to send reports. You can just use it. Will never get launched, right? And it is progressively being pulled out of the system. There's some European countries that now, cash transactions over $2,000 to $3,000 are illegal. Now they have a reporting requirement. They're just illegal. You can't do them anymore, right? And so the net effect is being shaped by the technology stack. The reason this is happening now and not in 1975, it was impossible in 1975 to have a global cell phone intermediated, smart app intermediated tax service. And so taxes, because you couldn't do the global part, because the global part needed, first of all, the internet, and then, high performance computing of some type, right? Without that, you couldn't do it. And so taxes were decentralized. Now taxes aren't just centralized in New York, they're centralized around the world. Like if you get banned from Uber, you're banned from a taxi in many, many cities. And you can say, someone's going to say, well, I'm not going to get banned from Uber. I have a 4.7 rating, whatever. Why does this matter? This is only for weirdos and annoying people. That's not the point, right? The point is this trend is showing no signs of stopping. It is not dramatically changing from day to day, but every day the last 20 years, it's going in one direction only. And what happens at the end state of this is you will have X firms, where X is not a number like 13,522, but a number 20 or 50, or maybe it's 100. And Y government services, which is a number less than 10, which might include CBDCs. And all of those very large databases will intermediate everything. And once that choke point exists, once that honeypot exists, there is a danger it will be exploited. I spend quite a bit of time, I'm in Europe right now, I spend quite a bit of time talking to the major governmental institutions in Europe. And the logic is like, oh, look, once we have CBDCs, it's going to be great. We're going to end money laundering, and we're going to end crime, we're going to end tax evasion, and in fact, we're going to end all types of social ills because we'll encourage, eating vegetarian food and eating less meat and all this stuff, right? And I think it's actually well-intentioned for most of these people. It's just no thinking about the second-order effects. And the second-order effects is that well before we end all crime and enter a golden age of happiness, someone will gain a hold, some very ambitious politician will gain control of the central banking node for their country, and when it's election time, their opponents won't be able to buy a tomato, because you're going to have this unreviewable system that can instantly, programmatically, statistically shut down large numbers of people. And if you can shut down transactions, you shut down everything else, right? I had been saying this before the episodes in Canada. In fact, when I'd say this example, I'd say Hungary. People are like, oh yeah, I can maybe sort of imagine Hungary, that might happen in Hungary or Turkey or Russia or one of those places. It wouldn't happen in the United States, of course, whatever. Right? And, for the purposes of this example, the Canadian example is perfect, because Canada is very obviously not a dictatorship. Like, I don't think Justin Trudeau is some evil leader or anything. Do I think the truckers I suspect my political views are probably borderline the opposite of the truckers, right? I suspect I would dislike almost all the truckers and would find them extremely annoying, right? None of that's the important part, right? The important part is like, a leader who is like, fairly liberal and like Canadians are all like super nice, right? Gets into a pickle, thinks about it for a little bit, not the first day, but like, oh, you know what? I'm just gonna like cut off their banking and the banking of everyone around them, and then they'll have to go home. And that's what happened. They had to go home. And the problem isn't, I have a lot of liberal friends like, oh, the truckers are jerks. I'm like, no, I understand that. That's not, you've got to think of first principles because like tomorrow this could be, I don't know, Black Lives Matters protesting and Donald Trump's back in office and says, oh, this is a great idea. I learned this from Justin Trudeau. We'll just freeze everyone's bank account. And then you're not going to like it as much, right? Like it won't seem as good as idea then. And the thing is, all of this stuff is running outside of due process, right? The whole AML complex. Is the AML complex, did it start with good intentions? Yeah, I think so, right? They're trying to prevent terrorist financing. I think so. But then it grows and grows and grows like any bureaucracy. And, it runs outside of, if some bank says, you can't have a bank account here. I've risk scored you. You're too sketchy. You're in a podcast called Bankless. That sounds very problematic. You can no longer bank at, First Third Bank of Idaho or whatever, right? Well, you can't go to court and get your bank account back, right? It's just gone. And this infrastructure that is getting set up bit by bit, and it's getting set up not because business leaders of America are evil. That's not why it's happening. It is an artifact of the technology that is available to us. And that technology, the internet leads to network effects. Everyone knows this, right? All VCs are like, oh, I want to buy the business with that. When invest in the business has network effects, so we're all going to get very rich, right? Because the distribution, the fact that you have zero cost distribution on the internet means that if you're slightly better, you win all the business, right? Amazon wins everyone's business. And so you'll end up, instead of having 2,000 bookstores, you have one, right? I'm simplifying, but it's that, right? And so you get these network effects, and those network effects in the digital economy become choke points. And so exactly in the opposite way, if crypto survives, all crypto has to do is survive. If crypto survives, its own network effects, its own technology architecture, its own way it shapes its social environment will be a huge counterweight to this. Because the way, there is no CEO of Bitcoin, right? There is no CEO of Ethereum. Vitalik's a little closer, right? But he's not really the CEO, right? Nobody can prevent you. He cannot decide, 6529 can't use Ethereum for this purpose. It's not within our corporate strategy, right? He's not like the CEO of Google. And so the fundamental permissionlessness of the architecture will lead over time to significant, different, and in fact the opposite of what I'm worried about, social structures around it. And I think that's very, very good. And this I've believed before NFTs, right? The freedom to transact stuff was a pre-NFT theory. It does not involve any NFTs. And I think it's really important, to be honest.